The applause was a physical thing, a wave of sound that washed over the ballroom and broke against me. From the outside, it must have looked like I was basking in it. Abigail Hayes, co-founder of Vanguard Designs, matriarch of living architecture, watching her firm's 25th anniversary celebration unfold. But inside, each clap felt like a shovelful of dirt being tossed onto a coffin. My coffin. On the stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to drain all the color from his face, stood Marcus Thorne, our CEO. His suit was Tom Ford, his smile was a carefully calibrated instrument of corporate reassurance, and his presence in my company felt like a virus that had finally taken over the host. He was a numbers man, a deal maker, someone who saw buildings not as breathing spaces for human beings, but as assets on a balance sheet. And with that incredible retrospective, Marcus's voice boomed, smooth and polished. We look to the future. A future defined by bold vision, by dynamic innovation, and by the brilliant mind leading our creative direction. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, painful rhythm. This was it. The culmination of a year of quiet sidelining, of my ideas being called quaint in board meetings, of my drafts being digitally enhanced by younger teams until they were unrecognizable. He's going to say my name, a small, foolish part of me thought. He has to. 25 years. My name is on the original letterhead. My sweat is in the mortar of our first building. A mind that has taken the foundational principles of Vanguard and launched them into the 21st century, Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on a figure in the front row. Ladies and gentlemen, the creative force behind our next quarter century, our director of design, Leo Vance. The name hit me harder than a physical blow. The applause surged again, louder this time, and as if in slow motion, Leo stood up. My Leo. The kid I'd found 20 years ago, straight out of Columbia, with a portfolio full of charcoal sketches that crackled with raw, untamed genius. I saw the potential in him when no one else did. I'd mentored him, taught him my philosophy, not just how to design a building, but how to listen to the land it sits on, how to make glass and steel feel like they grew from the earth. I gave him his first big break. I championed him for every promotion. I treated him like the son I never had. He turned, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something in them, a shadow of guilt maybe, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the bright, hungry glare of ambition. He gave a shallow nod, a pathetic, almost insulting acknowledgement before turning his back to me and ascending the stage to shake Marcus's hand. The prodigy and the dealmaker. The new Vanguard. My hands felt cold. I looked down at them, at the faint calluses on my fingertips that never quite went away, the ghost of graphite and drafting pencils. These hands had sketched every single one of the award-winning projects they had just shown in the video montage. My hands, my work, my soul, poured onto vellum and transformed into reality. And my name had been mentioned only once, a footnote in the story of my own life. Our esteemed co-founder, Abigail Hayes, whose early work laid the groundwork for our current success. Laid the groundwork. As if I were a piece of rebar buried in the concrete, necessary but invisible. Then came the final, most exquisite act of cruelty. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been showing images of our past glories, flickered to life with a new animation. A breathtaking, 30-second fly-through of a sleek, impossibly beautiful skyscraper that twisted towards the sky like a living organism. It was the Millennium Tower, the project that was meant to be my magnum opus, the culmination of my life's work. But I had never shown it to Marcus. I had only ever shown the initial concept sketches to one person. And here, Marcus's voice swelled with pride, is a first look at the future of the New York skyline. The crowning achievement of Vanguard's new vision, the Millennium Tower, designed by the one and only Leo Vance. The room erupted. Investors and city officials were on their feet, but I couldn't hear them. All I could see was my drawing, my private, deeply personal sketch from my leather-bound notebook, now rendered in glossy 3D with another man's name branded onto it. He hadn't just stolen my legacy, he had stolen my future. I didn't stay for the champagne. I slipped out a side door, the frigid November air a welcome shock to my system. The city lights of New York, the very skyline I had helped shape, seemed to mock me. I walked for hours, the sound of my heels on the pavement the only rhythm I could hold on to. He had taken everything. My projects, my position, my story. He and Marcus had orchestrated the perfect coup. They thought they had won. They thought I was a relic, a sentimental old woman to be put out to pasture. When I finally got back to my apartment, the silence was deafening. It was a space I had designed to be a sanctuary, filled with plants and natural light, with rough-hewn wood and sketches pinned to the walls. Tonight, it felt like a museum of a life that was already over. But as I stood in the middle of the room, a different feeling began to bloom in the cold emptiness of my chest. It was a slow, quiet heat. It was anger. An anger so pure and so deep it felt like bedrock. They thought I was finished. They thought the old woman was just going to fade away. But they had forgotten something. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just the artist. I was the architect. And an architect always knows the structural weaknesses of what she has built. I walked over to the old oak filing cabinet in the corner of my study, a piece that had been with me since the beginning. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled open the bottom drawer. It wasn't filled with drawings or awards. It was filled with old contracts, legal documents, the boring, bureaucratic skeleton of the company. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder, its pages yellowed with age, the original partnership agreement. Signed 25 years ago by me and by Michael, my co-founder, my best friend, who we lost to cancer a decade ago. Marcus had his lawyers look at it, of course, when he took over as CEO. They would have scanned it for loopholes, for financial liabilities, but they were business lawyers. They wouldn't have understood the language, Michael, and I wrote into our company's DNA. I flipped through the pages, the dry paper crinkling under my touch, until I found what I was looking for. There it was. Article 11, Section C, a clause we had called the Heritage Clause. It read, "In the event the company's core creative philosophy is demonstrably compromised, thereby threatening the integrity and reputation of its foundational works, the remaining co-founder, Abigail Hayes, reserves the right to invoke an independent review by the American Institute of Architects. The findings of said review will be legally binding upon the board of directors." Marcus and Leo saw Vanguard as a business, a machine for generating profit. But Michael and I had built it as a living entity, and we had written in a fail-safe, a self-destruct sequence that only I knew how to activate. They had stolen my art. They had tried to erase my name. Now, I was going to use the very foundation they stood upon to bring their entire hollow empire crashing down. The war was not over. It had just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through my blinds, casting long, geometric shadows across the floor. Sleep had been a stranger, but my exhaustion had been replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Anger is a fire that can consume you, but my anger was different. It was a forge, and I was about to craft a weapon. My plan wouldn't be a single, dramatic explosion. That was their style, loud and hollow. Mine would be a quiet deconstruction, a careful, methodical removal of the load-bearing lies they had constructed until the entire edifice of their success collapsed under its own weight. My revenge would be an act of architecture. The first step, the most critical one, was to secure my own foundations. A building is only as strong as what it rests upon, and a plan is only as strong as the people who support it. I could not do this alone. I needed a team, my own vanguard, loyal not to the new corporate brand, but to the original spirit of the work. My list was short, but it was solid as bedrock. My first call was to a man who understood foundations better than anyone. David Chen had been my head structural engineer for 2 decades before he'd happily retired to a quiet life in upstate New York, where he now built exquisite custom furniture. He was a man of few words, a man who trusted steel and concrete far more than he trusted people, which is precisely why I trusted him completely. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low, familiar rumble. "Abby," he said, "I saw the pictures from the gala. Looked shiny. I couldn't help but smile." In David's vocabulary, sturdy was the highest compliment. Shiny was a grave insult, a word reserved for cheap facades and empty promises. "Hello, David, it was all facade. I need to ask you a question, a technical one. Do you remember the cornerstone ceremony for the Atlas building, the one back in 2005? There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his mind, sifting through decades of blueprints and project files with eidetic precision. Raining that day. The mayor was late. We used the high tensile strength concrete mix you insisted on, the one that cost an extra $250,000. The board nearly had a fit. Why? Do you remember what we placed inside the final support pillar on the sub-basement level, just before the final pour? Another pause, longer this time. Then, a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. The architect's signature, your little trademark. A small, stainless steel plate with your initials and the design's core geometric ratio engraved on it. You said it was a message to the future. A way to prove the soul of the building belonged to you, long after we were all gone. We did it for the 5 big ones, didn't we? Atlas, the Meridian Center, the Bridge Tower, we did, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. He remembered. It wasn't just my memory. It was real. It was documented. I need you to be my witness, David. I need you to testify to that if it comes to it. What's going on, Abby? His voice lost its warmth, replaced by a hard, protective edge. Did those shiny bastards finally push you out? They're trying to bury me, David. They're trying to say I was just the groundwork. Groundwork, he scoffed, the sound sharp with indignation. You were the whole damn building, from the sub-basement to the spire. Tell me what you need, I'll be there. 1 pillar secured. Now for the second. I needed eyes and ears inside the company. I needed someone who hadn't yet been corrupted by the new regime's toxic ambition, someone who still remembered what Vanguard was supposed to stand for. My mind landed on Sophia Reyes. A brilliant young architect, quiet and observant, with a talent for sustainable design that reminded me so much of my younger self. I had seen the frustration in her eyes during recent design reviews, the way she would bite her tongue when Leo presented a flawed but flashy concept as unassailable genius. She still had the fire. She just needed a place to direct it. I sent her a message on a private, encrypted app we'd used occasionally to discuss non-work matters like a new museum exhibit or a rare book on architectural theory. Sophia, I need to ask for a favor, a discreet one, it's important. Her reply came almost instantly. Anything for you, Abby. I'm so sorry about what they did. It was a disgrace. The whole office is talking about it. So she knew, she saw. My faith in her was well placed. The knowledge that I wasn't alone, that there were still people inside who saw the truth, was a balm to my raw nerves. I need access to the final design files for the Millennium Tower, the ones Leo is claiming as his own, and any internal emails related to its development, budget, and material specifications. It was a huge risk for her. This wasn't just breaking a company rule, it was corporate espionage. If she were caught, her career, the one she had worked so hard to build, would be over before it truly began. I felt a pang of guilt asking it of her, but I knew this was a battle for the soul of the profession she loved. Her reply was just 3 words, but they were as strong as any contract. I'm on it. While my small team was assembling, the official blow I knew was coming finally landed. A courier in a crisp uniform arrived at my door with a thick, beige envelope from Vanguard Designs. Inside was a severance agreement that was both a profound insult and a clear threat. A generous check, yes, a number designed to numb the senses and encourage quiet compliance. But it was attached to an ironclad non-disclosure and non-compete agreement, written in dense legalese that boiled down to one thing: take this money and disappear forever. They weren't just firing me, they were buying my silence, trying to legally erase my ability to ever build or even speak about building again. I read the document twice, a cold fury rising in me. I saw Marcus Thorne's arrogant handwriting in every restrictive clause. He really believed a check could settle a lifetime of work, that my entire identity could be purchased and archived. I sat down at my desk, took out a single sheet of my heavy, cream-colored personal stationery, and uncapped my favorite fountain pen. I wrote a short reply, not to the HR department, but addressed directly to Marcus Thorne and the entire board of directors. I am in receipt of your offer. It is formally rejected. I suggest you direct your legal team to review the original partnership agreement, specifically Article 11, Section C. I trust they will find it illuminating. Regards, Abigail Hayes. I sealed the note in an envelope and sent it back with the same waiting courier. The first stone had been thrown. Now I waited for the ripples. According to Sophia, my email landed like a grenade in the executive suite. She sent me a message late that night. Panic, that's the only word for it. Marcus was furious, shouting that it was an empty threat. But their lawyers are scrambling. They've been in a closed-door meeting for hours. Leo looked like he'd seen a ghost. The next evening, a highly encrypted file appeared in my inbox from an anonymous source. It was from Sophia. It was a data dump containing everything I had asked for and more. The complete architectural plans and CAD files for the Millennium Tower, along with a chain of emails between Marcus, Leo, and the project's contractors stretching back 6 months. I spent the entire night poring over the data, my study illuminated only by the glow of my monitor. The first thing I saw confirmed my deepest fears, and it was a strange mix of validating and sickening. The design was undeniably mine. The core structure, the floor plans, the very flow of the building was a direct digital copy of my hand-drawn sketches. But it wasn't a perfect copy. Leo, in his arrogant attempt to put his own stamp on it, to justify his theft even to himself, had made modifications. He had altered the graceful, wind-tested curvature of the western facade to make it more dramatic, more aggressive. And he had changed the specifications for the glass paneling, opting for a cheaper, flashier, but less durable material that would catch the light in a more theatrical way. He was a talented artist, but a mediocre architect. He didn't understand the physics. He saw only the skin of the building, not the bones. My original design was a delicate, intricate balance of aesthetics and engineering. The curve was precisely calculated to distribute wind load across the structure's spine. The specific glass was chosen for its flexibility and tolerance under pressure. Leo had undone all of it. I ran his new specifications through a structural analysis program on my personal computer, a powerful piece of software I used for my own side projects. The results made my blood run cold. Leo's modifications had created a fatal flaw. In a high-wind scenario, the kind of nor'easter New York gets at least twice a year, his new, sharper facade would create a wind vortex effect, concentrating the pressure rather than dispersing it. The stress on his cheaper glass panels would be catastrophic. The model predicted a systemic failure. The building wouldn't just lose a few windows, it would rain daggers of glass down on the streets below. He hadn't just stolen my design. He had turned my masterpiece into a potential weapon. And then I read the emails. It was all there in black and white. Marcus Thorne, in his relentless push to cut costs and maximize profit margins, had approved the cheaper materials against the initial written warnings of the engineering team. He had written the damning sentence himself in a reply to the lead contractor. "Make it work. The aesthetic is what sells, not the rebar." I now had the motive, the evidence, and the weapon. They thought they had buried me, but they had only planted a seed. And they had no idea what was about to grow. A few days later, the first small crack appeared. Not in my plan, but in one of theirs. A well-known architectural blogger posted a photo online. It showed a long, spiderweb fracture on a large glass panel of a downtown building lobby that Vanguard had recently renovated under Leo's direct supervision. The caption was simple and damning. "New face, old problems. Vanguard's shiny new look is already showing signs of stress." It was a small thing, a minor story in the grand scheme of things, but it was a beginning. It was physical, tangible proof that their foundation was unsound. That morning, I picked up the phone and made a call. American Institute of Architects, a polite voice answered. "Hello," I said, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Abigail Hayes. I'm the co-founder of Vanguard Designs, and I would like to formally invoke the Heritage Clause." Invoking the Heritage Clause was like pulling the pin on a very old, very elegant grenade. The initial silence was the most unnerving part. For 2 full days, there was nothing. No frantic calls from Vanguard's lawyers, no threatening letters sent by courier. Just the ceaseless hum of the city outside my window and the heavy, kinetic weight of the evidence stored on my encrypted hard drive. I knew, however, that this silence was not stillness. It was the frantic, breathless moment before an explosion, the vacuum that precedes a shockwave. Sophia confirmed it. Her messages, sent through our secure channel, came in short, nervous bursts, painting a vivid picture of the chaos I had unleashed. They got the letter, certified mail. A team from the AIA is scheduling a preliminary visit. A few hours later, Marcus held a meeting with the senior partners, lots of shouting. He called your clause a sentimental relic with no legal teeth. He's bluffing, but he's loud. And then, the one that told me everything I needed to know, Leo is chained smoking on the terrace. He looks terrified. He knows. Of course, Leo knew. A businessman like Marcus sees a lawsuit, a battle of paper and billable hours. An architect like Leo sees a peer review, a jury of his betters. He knew his stolen, flawed design wouldn't survive the scrutiny of a single competent engineer, let alone a board composed of the nation's finest architectural minds. He had built his new career on a foundation of sand, and he could feel the tide coming in, cold and inexorable. The first tremor was internal. As the legal team scrambled to find a way to discredit a clause written into the company's very DNA, Vanguard's workflow began to seize up. The impending AIA review cast a long shadow over every active project. Leo, once the golden boy whose every pronouncement was treated as gospel, was now a liability. His projects, the ones he had pushed through with sheer charisma and Marcus's blessing, started to unravel under the harsh light of impending oversight. A boutique hotel in Miami reported that the custom facade panels he'd designed, the ones that were supposed to be the building's signature feature, didn't fit the support structure. It was a rookie mistake, a miscalculation of thermal expansion, and it would cost millions and cause months of delays. The concrete pour for a new museum wing in Chicago had to be halted because his team had miscalculated the load capacity for the main gallery, an error that could have led to a catastrophic collapse. These were not the actions of a visionary. They were the embarrassing, dangerous mistakes of an overconfident fraud. The crack in the lobby window, once a minor embarrassment, became a potent symbol. The blogger who first posted the photo followed up with a more detailed piece titled "Cracks in the Vanguard." It was picked up by a larger online design magazine. The story was no longer just about a single broken window. It was about a potential pattern of declining quality, of style over substance. Then came the call I had been preparing Sophia for. Weeks ago, I had given her the name of a journalist, a woman named Jessica Riley at the New York Journal. Jessica was known for her relentless, in-depth investigations into corporate malpractice, a bulldog who smelled lies like other people smelled coffee. I had told Sophia, if you ever feel the time is right, if you have something concrete that shows a pattern of negligence, she is the one who will listen. Just give her the scent, she'll do the rest. Sophia, brave, brilliant Sophia, leaked one thing, not the Millennium Tower plans, that was our ace, the card to be played at the hearing itself. She leaked the internal report about the Miami hotel facade, the one where the engineers had warned Leo in writing about the measurements, and he had arrogantly dismissed them in an email, writing the now infamous line, "My vision doesn't bend to a spreadsheet." Jessica Riley did not disappoint. 2 days later, a major article appeared on the journal's website, positioned prominently on the homepage, "Vanguard's Visionary or Vanguard's Liability." Insiders allege cost-cutting and design flaws plague architectural giant. The article was a bombshell. It didn't just mention the Miami project, it expertly wove in the story of the cracked window and the museum delay. Jessica had clearly found other disgruntled employees who were willing to speak off the record. The story painted a devastating picture of a company that had deliberately traded its hard-won reputation for rapid, flashy growth under the reckless leadership of Marcus Thorne and Leo Vance. The stock price, which had soared after the anniversary gala, took a nosedive, shedding nearly 20% of its value in a single day of trading. A major institutional investor from Dubai, who was in the final stages of a $700 million hotel project with Vanguard, suddenly and very publicly put the deal on hold, citing concerns about brand integrity and quality control. Marcus and Leo were cornered. And cornered animals don't reason, they lash out. Their counterattack was as clumsy as it was vicious. They arranged an exclusive interview with a friendly, fawning industry magazine, the kind that values access over journalism. The headline was a declaration of war. Vanguard CEO accuses ousted founder of sabotage campaign. In the article, Marcus painted a picture of me as a bitter, vengeful woman, unable to accept that the company had moved on without me. He claimed I was resentful of new talent, a relic of a bygone era clinging to outdated methods. Then came the lie, a lie so audacious, so monstrous, it almost took my breath away. He claimed that the recent project failures were a direct result of my actions, that I had intentionally embedded systemic flaws and digital time bombs into the company's design templates and protocols before I left, all as part of a twisted campaign to destroy the company that had cast me aside. Leo, quoted extensively in the same article, played the part of the wounded, heartbroken protégé to perfection. "I'm devastated," he said, his fake sincerity practically dripping from the page. "Abby was my mentor, my inspiration. I can't believe she would do this to us, to the legacy she herself built. It's a tragedy." It was a brilliant, disgusting piece of character assassination. They weren't just trying to discredit me professionally, they were trying to poison my entire life's work, to reframe my legacy as one of malice and sabotage. They were counting on the world to see a scorned old woman, not a master architect fighting for the soul of her profession. It was a fatal miscalculation. They had just given me the moral high ground in front of the entire world. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times, taking a deep, calming breath, then answered, my voice perfectly level. "Hello. Don't you dare play innocent with me." Abby, Marcus Thorne's voice was a venomous snarl, stripped of its usual corporate polish. "You're leaking documents. You're trying to burn my company to the ground. It's not your company, Marcus. It never was. It's a living thing, and you and your boy genius are treating it like a strip mine. I'm going to ruin you, he hissed, his voice thick with rage. I'm going to sue you for every penny you have. I will drag your name through the mud until no one in the city will even let you design a doghouse. This is your last chance. Call off the AIA, retract your statements. Walk away now, and I'll let you keep your dignity. I was silent for a moment, letting his impotent threats hang in the air. I looked out my window at the city skyline, at the silent, strong silhouettes of the buildings I had poured my heart into. They stood strong, true to their design. I had a duty to them and to Michael, the man I built them with. Are you listening to me? He demanded. I am, I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished granite. And I'm not the one who should be worried about my dignity. I continued, letting each word land with the weight of a carefully placed stone. I will see you at the hearing, Marcus. Be sure to bring your lawyer. I paused, letting him think that was the end of it before delivering the final, fatal blow. And an architect. I hung up the phone before he could respond, the metallic click echoing in the profound quiet of my apartment. The storm was no longer coming. We were in the eye of it, and I was the only one who knew the way out. The AIA hearing was not a courtroom drama. There were no gavels, no shouting lawyers in ill-fitting suits, no jury of ordinary citizens. It was something far more formal, far more intimidating. A quiet, sterile conference room on the 40th floor of a midtown office building, presided over by a panel of 5 individuals who were, in our world, the equivalent of Supreme Court justices. These were the titans, the legends whose names were etched onto university buildings and whose theories filled our textbooks. This was a trial not of law, but of integrity. My entire life's work, my very name, would be judged in this room. I sat on one side of a long, impossibly polished mahogany table. I had chosen my seat deliberately, the one with a clear view of the Atlas building several blocks away. It stood as a silent, monolithic witness on my behalf. On the other side of the table sat Marcus Thorne, looking sleek and predatory in a dark suit, flanked by a team of 3 expensive lawyers from a firm known for its scorched earth tactics. Leo Vance sat next to them, looking pale and gaunt, a ghost at his own feast. He steadfastly refused to meet my eye. He spent the entire time staring at a blank notepad on the table before him, as if the answers to his survival were written there in invisible ink. The head of the panel was a woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, a legendary figure from MIT whose groundbreaking work on wind dynamics and structural resonance had literally reshaped modern skyscraper design. She was a woman in her late 70s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She did not suffer fools, and her gaze, when it fell on you, felt like a structural analysis, probing for weaknesses, for stress points, for the slightest hint of fabrication. The proceedings began. Marcus's lawyers went first, presenting their case with the practiced, corporate smoothness that cost thousands of dollars per hour. They spun a compelling narrative, portraying me as a disgruntled former employee, a Luddite resisting the necessary tide of innovation. They presented colorful charts and graphs showing the company's record profits since I had been marginalized, as if financial success was an absolution for all other sins. They argued that the Heritage Clause, the very mechanism that had brought us all here, was a vague, unenforceable piece of corporate sentimentality, a historical artifact with no legal teeth. They painted Leo as a visionary, the victim of my professional jealousy, a rising star whose brilliance I had tried to extinguish. Then they made their critical, fatal mistake. Emboldened by their own rhetoric, they brought up the Millennium Tower. This project, their lead counsel announced, a man with a booming voice and an overly confident smile, gestured to a sleek architectural model on the table. This is the very embodiment of the innovative spirit Ms. Hayes sought to stifle. It is a bold, forward-thinking design by Mr. Vance that will redefine the New York skyline and stand as a testament to the new vanguard. Dr. Reed, who had been listening patiently, leaned forward slightly, her fingers steepled. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's air conditioning hum with immense authority. This is your design, correct? From initial concept to final specification? Leo swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced nervously at Marcus, who gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Yes, Dr. Reed, it is. Then perhaps you can walk the panel through your wind load calculations for the western facade, she continued, her tone conversational but her question a razor-sharp scalpel. Specifically, the dynamic pressure coefficients you used to account for the torsional effects of your revised curvature. It was an expert-level question, a surgeon asking another surgeon to describe a complex, non-standard procedure. It was a question designed to separate the architect from the artist. I could have answered it in my sleep. I had spent 6 months of my life perfecting those very calculations. Leo, who had stolen the art but not the science, floundered visibly. Well, that the simulations were run using the industry-standard software, he stammered, shuffling a stack of irrelevant papers. The parameters were, well, they were robust. The system accounts for those effects automatically. The air in the room grew cold. He had no idea what she was talking about. He had just admitted, in the most technical way possible, that he had simply clicked a button without understanding the physics behind it. He was a plagiarist who hadn't even bothered to do the required reading. Dr. Reed's eyes narrowed just a fraction. I see. Then, it was my turn. I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought David Chen. I stood up and addressed the panel directly, my voice clear and steady. My name is Abigail Hayes. For 25 years, I was the chief architect and co-founder of Vanguard Designs. My work is not about stifling innovation. It's about ensuring that innovation doesn't kill people. I didn't talk about bitterness or betrayal. I didn't mention the gala or the stolen credit. I talked about physics. I presented my original design for the Millennium Tower. I showed them my hand-drawn sketches, my notebooks filled with calculations, the methodical, painstaking evolution of the design. I walked them through my reasoning, my material choices, the meticulous balance of form and function that was the hallmark of my work. Then, I put Leo's revised design on the large monitor behind me. This is not an evolution of my design, I stated calmly, letting the two images hang in the air side by side. It is a desecration of it. I presented my own structural analysis, the one I had run on my home computer. I showed them the simulation of the wind vortex, a swirling red mass of pressure concentrating on the very spot Leo had altered. I showed them the catastrophic stress points on the cheaper glass he had specified. I showed them the final, horrifying projection, a systemic failure, a cascade of shattering panels, a skyscraper raining daggers of glass onto the city below. A heavy, profound silence filled the room. The panel members were no longer just looking at blueprints, they were looking at a potential disaster. The legal arguments and corporate posturing evaporated, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of irresponsible engineering. This analysis, one of the engineers on the panel said, his face grim and pale, is deeply disturbing. If it's accurate, it's a fabrication. Marcus's lawyer interjected, jumping to his feet with theatrical outrage. She's created a doomsday scenario using unverified software to support her baseless claims. She's trying to sabotage the project. Dr. Reed held up a single, elegant hand, and the lawyer fell silent as if she'd flipped a switch. We will be running our own independent analysis, of course, using our own models. But there is another matter we must address first. The matter of authorship. This was David Chen's moment. He walked to the front of the room, not as a witness for a lawsuit, but as an engineer reporting incontrovertible facts. He presented the original building permits and cornerstone records for 5 of Vanguard's most iconic buildings, official city documents. Each one had a small, overlooked addendum, a document he had insisted on filing himself at the time, signed by both me and him, detailing the installation of a non-structural, identifying element. The architect's signature, David explained, his voice steady and confident. A small, 3x5-inch engraved steel plate, sealed within a primary support column on the lowest level of each building. It bears her initials, AH, and the core geometric ratio of that specific design. It proves, unequivocally and permanently, who the true architect was. He then produced a new, notarized affidavit, signed by the foreman of the original construction crew, confirming their installation of said plates. It was a physical, unforgeable chain of custody for my ideas, buried deep within the concrete heart of the city. Leo finally looked up, his face ashen, a mask of pure terror. He had been so busy trying to steal the future, he had never bothered to properly investigate the past. The final piece of evidence, the nail in their corporate coffin, came from an unexpected source. Sophia Reyes had chosen her moment perfectly. The night before the hearing, she had officially resigned from Vanguard Designs. And as her final act, she had forwarded a single, damning email to the AIA's general counsel. Dr. Reed looked down at a printout in front of her. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice now dangerously calm, all academic detachment gone. "We are in possession of an internal email, dated 3 months ago, in which you instructed your engineering team to approve substandard materials for the Millennium Tower, stating, and I quote, "The aesthetic is what sells, not the rebar." Do you have a comment on that? Marcus Thorne's face, usually a mask of confident, predatory charm, crumbled. The blood drained from it. His lawyers shuffled their papers, their blustering confidence completely gone. There was no legal argument, no clever turn of phrase that could defend that sentence. It was the confession of a man who would knowingly and willingly gamble with human lives for the sake of profit. The edifice was collapsing. Leo Vance, the boy genius, was exposed as a reckless fraud and a common thief. Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, was revealed as a negligent, dangerous gambler. The panel didn't need to deliberate for long. They adjourned for less than an hour, a sign of a unanimous and swift decision. When they returned, Dr. Reed's expression was resolute, etched in granite. She looked directly at Marcus and Leo, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine anger in her eyes. This panel finds that there has been a profound and dangerous deviation from the founding principles and professional standards of Vanguard Designs. We find Mr. Vance's actions to constitute gross professional malpractice and unambiguous plagiarism. We find Mr. Thorne's leadership to be negligent to a degree that jeopardizes public safety. She then turned her gaze to me, and the hardness in her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. And we find that Abigail Hayes's invocation of the Heritage Clause was not only justified, but a necessary and commendable act of professional responsibility. It was over. The quiet deconstruction was complete. I hadn't needed to shout or scream. The truth, when properly presented, has a weight all its own, and it had just crushed them. Marcus stared into space, a ruined man, his empire of shiny facades reduced to rubble. Leo finally looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, begging for a lifeline from the very person he had tried so callously to drown. I met his gaze, and I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just the cold, clean finality of a perfectly executed design. The fallout was not a single, cinematic explosion, but a series of controlled, cascading demolitions that brought Marcus and Leo's world down pillar by pillar. The AIA's findings, while technically confidential to the proceedings, were a death sentence in the tight-knit, gossip-fueled world of architecture. The verdict spread not like a wildfire, but like an untraceable, toxic gas, seeping under every door in the industry. The first to fall, and the fastest, was Leo. The panel's recommendation to the state licensing board was severe and unambiguous. His architect's license was suspended indefinitely, pending further investigation that everyone knew was a formality for permanent revocation. He was a pariah. An email was discreetly circulated among the major firms, a quiet, professional shunning. I heard through the grapevine, from a gossipy old colleague, that he'd tried to get a meeting with a rival firm, a place known for its aggressive, star-chasing culture. He couldn't even get the principal's assistant on the phone. The golden boy's shine was gone, revealing the cheap, corroded plating underneath. He had built his reputation on my name, and now, without it, he was nothing. He was less than nothing. He was a liability, a walking symbol of plagiarism and malpractice. A few days after the hearing, he tried to call me. I saw his name on my phone's screen and felt a strange, hollow echo of the affection I once had for him. It was like looking at a photograph of a dead person. I watched the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button, and then I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I never listened to the message. I deleted it unheard. Our conversation was over, concluded in that silent, sterile conference room. The last I heard, he had sold his ridiculously overpriced downtown loft at a significant loss and moved back in with his parents in a quiet suburb in Ohio. He had flown too close to the sun, on wings he had stolen from me, and the fall back to earth was brutal. Marcus Thorne's demise was more public, more corporate, and in its own way, far more humiliating. The board of directors, a group of men who had for years been happy to cash the dividend checks his ruthless tactics generated, were now faced with the AIA's damning report and the very real threat of catastrophic, career-ending lawsuits from investors and clients. They acted with the swift, merciless self-preservation of cornered rats. An emergency board meeting was called the day after the hearing. I wasn't there, of course, but Arthur Kensington, the board's elderly chairman and a man I had known for 30 years, called me later that evening to describe the scene. He said Marcus had come in, still blustering, still trying to spin the hearing as a difference of professional opinion. But the room was ice cold. The men who had once slapped him on the back and laughed at his jokes now looked at him as if he were a cancerous tumor that needed to be excised. The vote to terminate his contract for gross negligence and conduct detrimental to the company was unanimous. He was escorted out of the building by security, not even allowed to return to his office to collect his personal effects. The press release they issued the next morning was a brutal masterpiece of corporate hypocrisy. It lauded Vanguard's unwavering, century-long commitment to safety and structural integrity, and framed Marcus as a rogue actor whose values did not align with the company's storied history. They threw him under the bus with such force and precision that they almost managed to make it look like he had jumped. His fall was spectacular. The business journals that had once celebrated his aggressive, take-no-prisoners style now dissected his failures with schadenfreude-laced glee. The $700 million Dubai deal was officially dead, the investors releasing a statement about their relief at having avoided a partnership with a firm that had lost its ethical compass. Other clients, spooked by the scandal, initiated costly independent audits of their own projects, further draining Vanguard's resources and credibility. Marcus, the man who lived for his public image, for the galas and the Davos panels and the fawning interviews, became a ghost. He vanished from the society pages, from the industry panels, from the entire world he had fought so ruthlessly to conquer. His name became a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. With the villains dispatched, the question of the company's future remained. Vanguard was bleeding money, talent, and credibility. It was a ship without a captain or a rudder, heading directly for an iceberg of bankruptcy. The board called another emergency meeting. This time, they didn't summon me, they invited me. They begged me. Arthur Kensington called me himself. His voice, usually so robust and confident, was thin and reedy with desperation. "Abigail," he pleaded, "please, we need to talk. The company needs you." I walked into the same boardroom where Marcus had once called my ideas quaint, where my concerns had been dismissed with a condescending pat on the hand. This time, there was no arrogance, only the quiet, palpable desperation of powerful men who had seen their fortunes and reputations evaporate in the space of a week. They stood up when I entered the room, a gesture of respect they hadn't afforded me in years. They offered me everything: the CEO position, the title of president, a salary that was frankly obscene, with a stock option package that would have made me one of the wealthiest women in the country. They wanted me to be the face of the company's redemption. They needed Abigail Hayes, the founder, the wronged party, the very soul of the machine, to step back in and tell the world that the cancer had been removed and everything was going to be all right. I listened to their offer, to their pleas and their panicked promises of unlimited creative control. I looked at their tired, frightened faces. They weren't evil men, not really. They were just weak, easily seduced by the siren song of easy profit that Marcus had sung so beautifully. They had let a wolf into the fold because he promised to make them all rich, and now they were begging the shepherd to come back and fix the fence. When they were finished, the room was silent, all eyes on me. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting them absorb the full weight of their dependency on my answer. Then, I gave it to them. No. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. A stunned silence filled the room. Arthur Kensington looked at me, his face a mask of bewildered disbelief. "No, Abigail, what do you mean no? We need you. The company needs you. This is your legacy." "You are correct, Arthur," I said, my voice calm and measured, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for so long. "It is my legacy, and I will not allow it to be defined by cleaning up your mess. I will not spend the final chapter of my career as a repair job." I stood up and walked to the large, floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. I could see 3 of my own buildings from here. I was not coming back. Not as an employee, not as a CEO. To accept their offer would be to step right back into the prison I had just escaped. The endless meetings, the budget fights, the compromises, that wasn't me anymore. I could feel the panic rising in the room behind me, a palpable, suffocating wave. But I said, turning back to face them, "I will not let Vanguard die. Michael and I built it to last. I have my own terms. I laid them out. They were not a negotiation, they were an edict. First, I would not accept a salary. Instead, they would divest a significant, non-negotiable portion of their annual profits into a new, independent foundation, chartered in my name. The Hayes Foundation for Architectural Integrity. Its mission would be twofold: to fund and oversee independent safety reviews for major public building projects across the country, and to provide full scholarships for promising young architecture students who are committed to ethical and sustainable design. My name would be attached to fixing the industry's systemic problems, not just one company's. Second, I would serve as a permanent, special advisor to the board, a non-executive role. I would have final, binding veto power over the selection of the new CEO and the new director of design, and over any project exceeding a certain budget. I would ensure that the people who led Vanguard from now on understood that they were not just managing assets, they were stewards of a public trust. I would be the company's conscience, not its manager. Third, the Millennium Tower project was to be scrapped entirely, effective immediately. The design was tainted, its soul poisoned. All files were to be deleted. To try and fix it would be to build on a corrupt foundation. They would have to go back to the beginning with a new design, a new vision, one that prioritized safety and beauty in equal measure. This was non-negotiable. Finally, my first official recommendation as special advisor was for the new director of design. I told them there was only one person for the job, Sophia Reyes. She had the talent, she had the vision, and most importantly, she had demonstrated the courage to do what was right, even at great personal risk. She was the future of the company. They were trapped, and they knew it. It was either accept my terms or watch the company they had stewarded into a ditch finally crumble into lawsuits and bankruptcy. They voted unanimously, their faces grim, to approve every single one of my conditions. I walked out of that building not as a returning hero, but as something else entirely. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was the conscience. I held more real power now than I ever did when I sat at a drafting table. My revenge was complete, but it wasn't the petty, fleeting satisfaction of seeing my enemies fall that filled me. It was something deeper, something more structural. I hadn't just won a battle, I had restructured the entire battlefield. I had taken their attempt to erase me and used it to carve my principles into the very legal and financial bedrock of the company. They had tried to make me a footnote. Instead, I had become the author of the next chapter. The weight I had been carrying for the past year, the cold, hard knot of anger in my chest, finally began to dissolve. It was replaced by a sense of profound, quiet purpose. The fight was over. Now, the rebuilding could begin. The rebuilding began not with concrete and steel, but with a single, quiet conversation. It was an act of mentorship, the first true architectural work I had done in over a year. My first official meeting as special advisor was with Sophia Reyes. We didn't meet in the cold, intimidating corporate offices of Vanguard, a place still haunted by the ghosts of what had transpired. Instead, we sat in my apartment in my sun-drenched study, surrounded by books and sketches and the faint, familiar scent of old paper and graphite. The sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a stark, welcome contrast to the dark, pressure cooker atmosphere of the last few months. Sophia was terrified. She sat on the edge of my sofa, clutching a folder of her own designs as if it were a life raft in a turbulent sea. She couldn't believe it. Director of Design of Vanguard. At 32, it was an unprecedented, meteoric rise. Abby, she started, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the calm, professional demeanor she was trying to project. I don't know if I can do this. I'm not you. I don't have your experience, your gravitas. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes. I poured us both a cup of jasmine tea, the familiar ritual calming my own nerves as much as I hoped it would calm hers. Gravitas is just a fancy word for having made enough mistakes to know what not to do, Sophia. You have something much better, something I can't teach. You have a clean slate, and you have unimpeachable integrity. You risked everything you've ever worked for to do the right thing. That kind of courage is more valuable than any portfolio. We spent that entire afternoon not talking about budgets or client lists or damage control. We talked about ideas. She opened her folder and hesitantly showed me her concepts, the personal projects she worked on at night after the soul-crushing day job of executing Leo's soulless designs. Her work was breathtaking. She showed me sketches of buildings that breathed, structures that incorporated vertical gardens not just as fashionable decoration, but as integral parts of their air filtration and greywater recycling systems. She had a design for a library that used passive solar and geothermal heating, a building that would have a near-zero carbon footprint. They were brilliant, raw, and full of the same untamed, passionate energy I had once seen in a young Leo Vance. But there was a crucial, fundamental difference. Her designs were grounded in a deep, abiding respect for the environment and for the people who would one day inhabit those spaces. She wasn't trying to build monuments to herself, she was trying to build habitats for humanity. Watching her, listening to her passion as she explained the intricate dance of light and air in her designs, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just pride in my choice, it was hope. For so long, I had been fighting to protect the past, to preserve a legacy. Now, for the first time, I was looking at the future, and it didn't scare me. It excited me. I realized in that moment that my true, lasting legacy wasn't going to be the buildings I had designed. It was going to be her, and the others like her that the Hayes Foundation would soon support. My legacy would be a generation of architects who built with a conscience. The foundation itself became my new, all-consuming project. It was my magnum opus, more complex and more important than any skyscraper. It wasn't just a passive fund, a name on a letterhead. I took an active, hands-on role. We set up a rigorous scholarship program for students from underprivileged backgrounds, kids from all over the country who had the talent but not the family connections or the financial means to attend the elite architecture schools. I insisted on being on the selection committee, on interviewing the finalists myself via video call. One afternoon, I interviewed a young man named Jamal from the Bronx. He was 18, attending a public high school with no arts program to speak of. He had taught himself drafting from old library books. He showed me his sketchbook, and it wasn't filled with the soaring, egotistical skyscrapers that so many young students draw. It was filled with incredibly detailed, thoughtful drawings of community centers, public parks, and affordable housing complexes that were both beautiful and profoundly functional. He talked with a quiet, fierce passion about how architecture could heal a neighborhood, how a well-designed, well-lit public space could give people back their dignity. Listening to him, I saw myself 40 years ago, a scholarship girl from Queens with a sketchbook full of impossible dreams. I saw Michael. I saw the pure, unadulterated belief that what we did mattered, that it could make the world a better place. I gave Jamal the first full 4-year scholarship on the spot. The look on his face, a stunning, breathtaking wave of pure, undiluted joy, healed a part of me I didn't even know was broken. It was a greater feeling of accomplishment than winning any award or cutting any ribbon. I also kept my promise to David Chen. I visited him upstate a few months later, taking the train out of the city and into the green, rolling hills of the Hudson Valley. His workshop smelled of sawdust and beeswax and linseed oil, a scent that felt more real and honest than any perfume. He was working on a beautiful cherry wood dining table, his large, capable hands moving with the same calm, unhurried precision they had once used to approve suspension bridge cables. "You did good, Abby," he said, not looking up from a particularly tricky dovetail joint. "The new girl, Sophia, I saw her interview in Architectural Digest. She seems sturdy." I laughed a real, unburdened laugh. Coming from David, it was the highest possible praise. "She is, David. She's going to be better than all of us." He finally looked up from his work, wiping his hands on his canvas apron. He had a small, rare smile on his lips. "Nobody's better than you, Abby, but she might come close." We sat on his porch that evening, drinking iced tea and watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the twilight. We didn't talk about Marcus or Leo. They were ghosts, fading memories of a bad dream that had no place here. We talked about wood grain, about the way light hits a curved surface, about the enduring beauty of things built honestly, with skill and with care. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the country, I realized that I was happy. It was not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled happiness of winning a big contract or seeing a project completed. It was a deeper, more resonant contentment, a structural happiness. I had lost my company, yes, the company that had been my entire identity for so long, but in losing it, I had found something much more important. I had found my purpose again, a purpose that wasn't confined to the four walls of an office. The final act of my personal healing, the moment the last of the structural stress faded from my soul, came a year later. Vanguard, under its new, quiet leadership and Sophia's creative direction, had stabilized. They were smaller, leaner, more focused. They were no longer chasing every shiny project that came along. They were selective, and they were respected again. They had just completed their first major project under the new regime, a new public library in a working-class neighborhood in Queens. It was a project Sophia had spearheaded, fighting for it even when the budget was tight. They held a small, informal opening ceremony, more of a community block party than a corporate gala. I attended not as a VIP, not as a special guest, just as a member of the public. I stood in the back, watching the community flood into the building. I saw children, their eyes wide with wonder, running to the brightly colored reading nooks. I saw teenagers setting up their laptops in sunlit study carrels. I saw old men finding quiet corners with newspapers. It was a living, breathing space, filled with light and sound and life. It was exactly what architecture should be. Sophia found me afterwards. She looked tired but radiant, a smudge of chalk on her cheek. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice filled with a familiar, anxious hope for my approval. "I think," I said, taking her hands in mine, "that Michael would have loved it." "It's perfect, Sophia. It's absolutely perfect." Tears welled up in her eyes, tears of relief and joy, and she hugged me tightly. In that warm, genuine embrace, the last vestiges of my bitterness, the final hairline fractures of my anger, finally washed away. I hadn't been replaced. I had been succeeded. And I realized that was a beautiful, powerful, and profoundly healing thing. As I walked home that evening, the city felt different. It wasn't just a collection of my past achievements, a museum of my own history anymore. It was a living canvas, constantly evolving, constantly changing. I walked past the familiar silhouettes of the buildings I had designed, and I nodded to them like old friends. They were my past. But my future was in the students I was helping, in the integrity I had restored to my profession, and in the quiet, foundational knowledge that I had stood my ground and won. I was no longer just Abigail Hayes, the architect. I was Abigail Hayes, the matriarch. And my family, my legacy, was growing every day. I had built my life on strong foundations, and though the storm had raged with a fury that should have torn it all down, the house still stood. It was different now, perhaps a little weathered, with a few new rooms I had never planned on. But it was warmer, brighter, and filled with more life than ever before. And that, I realized, was the greatest design of all. My new beginning didn't have a grand opening ceremony or a ribbon cutting. It arrived quietly, without fanfare, like the first correct line drawn on a blank sheet of vellum. It was a life built not on deadlines and board meetings, but on moments, each one a carefully placed stone in a new, stronger foundation. The moment a scholarship student's face lit up with sudden understanding when I explained the elegant, invisible principles of tensile strength. The moment Sophia called me late one night, not for advice on a crisis, but just to share the sheer, unadulterated joy of a design breakthrough, her voice buzzing with the creative energy I knew so well. The moment I was reading a magazine and saw Marcus Thorne's name mentioned in passing, and I realized with a jolt of surprise that I hadn't thought about him in months, and that the name now evoked nothing in me, no anger, no satisfaction, just a profound, empty indifference. The Hayes Foundation became my new blueprint, my life's masterwork. We weren't just a passive funding body, a name on a check. We became an active, disruptive force for good in the industry. We sponsored a national competition for sustainable urban housing, and the winning designs weren't just theoretical fantasies destined to gather dust in an archive. We partnered with nonprofits and ethical developers to actually get them built. I found myself on muddy construction sites again, wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots, not as the chief architect with all the pressure on my shoulders, but as a mentor, a guide, a source of encouragement. I was teaching a new generation not just how to build structures, but how to build communities with respect and with empathy. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was giving a guest lecture at Columbia, my alma mater, in the very same lecture hall where I had once sat as a terrified, ambitious student. The room was packed, not just with students with sleepy eyes and backpacks, but with young professionals, architects in their 20s and 30s who had taken time off work to be there. I talked about the Millennium Tower. I didn't present it as a story of personal revenge. I presented it as a clinical, dispassionate case study in professional ethics. I talked about the seductive, corrosive danger of prioritizing aesthetics over integrity, of valuing the shiny over the sturdy, as David would say. After the lecture, as I was packing my notes, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 30, with a sharp haircut and fire in her eyes, the same fire I had seen in Sophia, in Jamal, and long ago in my own reflection. "Ms. Hayes," she said, her voice filled with a passionate, earnest urgency, "what you did, it changed everything for people like me. You drew a line in the sand. You made it clear that you can be successful without selling your soul. That was it. That was the victory. It wasn't about the money, which was now flowing into the foundation. It wasn't about the power I now wielded from behind the scenes. It wasn't even about the public vindication. It was about this. It was about knowing that the ripples from that one stone I had thrown into the pond were still spreading, creating waves of change in a way I had never anticipated. My personal, painful story had become a lesson, a source of strength for others. It had been forged into something useful. I still kept my apartment in the city, my sanctuary overlooking the skyline I knew so well. But I found myself spending more and more time upstate, in a small, rustic cottage I bought on a few acres of land not far from David's workshop. It was a simple place, a fixer-upper, and I took immense joy in designing and personally overseeing its renovation. I converted an old, dilapidated barn into a magnificent new drafting studio for myself, with a huge north-facing window that looked out over the woods. And I started drawing again. Not for clients, not for contracts, but for the sheer love of it. I sketched impossible, whimsical structures, houses that grew organically out of hillsides, footbridges that looked like they were spun from silk and morning dew. I was no longer building for a skyline, but for my own heart. I was playing again, and the pure, unburdened joy of creation, the feeling that had drawn me to this profession in the first place, came flooding back. The final piece of closure, the last hairline crack to be sealed, came unexpectedly. I was in the city for a foundation board meeting. Walking down Park Avenue after the meeting, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows down the canyons of steel and glass, I saw him. Leo. He was coming out of a generic, soulless office building, the kind that houses 1,000 nameless consulting firms. He was carrying a small cardboard box, the kind you're given when you're fired, filled with a sad little collection of personal belongings, a coffee mug, a picture frame, a dying desk plant. He was thinner, and the hungry ambition in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary hollowness. He saw me. And for a moment, the bustling city fell away and we just stood there, two ghosts on a busy sidewalk, suspended in a moment of shared history. He took a hesitant, shuffling step towards me. "Abby," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a dry rasp. I'm sorry, for everything." I looked at him, at the man who had been my protégé, my greatest hope, and my deepest betrayal. And in that moment, I felt a surprising, profound sense of peace. The anger was gone. The hurt was a distant echo, a scar that no longer ached. All that was left was a quiet, detached sadness for the immense talent he had squandered, for the brilliant future he had thrown away. "I know you are, Leo," I said, and my voice was gentle, without a trace of malice. There was no need for anything more. I wished him well, a simple, honest sentiment, and I walked away. I did not look back. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift I was giving to him. It was a final blueprint I had to file away for myself to make room for the new ones. That evening, I attended the opening of a new gallery exhibit featuring architectural photography. As I wandered through the rooms, I turned a corner and stopped dead. There, dominating an entire wall, was a stunning, large-format photograph of the Queen's public library, the one Sophia had designed. In the photo, the golden light of the late afternoon streamed through the high, soaring windows, illuminating the faces of dozens of children, all completely lost in the worlds held in their books. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated purpose. Beneath the photograph was a small, simple brass plaque. It read, "Queen's Public Library, Vanguard Designs, Director of Design, Sophia Reyes." And underneath, in smaller, elegant letters, were the words, "This building stands on a foundation of integrity, inspired by the enduring principles of Abigail Hayes." I stood there for a long time, looking at the image, at the words. My name was not the biggest on the plaque. It wasn't the one in the spotlight, but it was the one that held the others up. I was the groundwork. And for the first time, I understood the profound, quiet, unshakable strength in that role. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about restoration. I hadn't burned their empire to the ground. I had simply stripped away the rotten, corrupted facade to reveal the strong foundations that had been there all along. And then, I had handed the tools to a new generation of builders, a generation I had taught to build with truth, with passion, and with a conscience. I had been erased, and in fighting back, I had become indelible. I had lost a company, and in doing so, I had found my true, lasting legacy. A legacy not written in steel and glass, but in the lives I had touched, the students I had inspired, and the safe, beautiful, honest future I had helped to build. I was Abigail Hayes, the architect, and I was finally, completely healed.